Forget everything you think you know about Vikings. We all picture these insane warriors with giant axes, their ships crashing through the waves, right? We see them as these one-dimensional killing machines that just burn down Europe. But what if I told you that entire image is completely wrong? What if their deadliest weapon wasn't made of steel at all? What if the reason people were so terrified of them wasn't just what they did on the battlefield, but what they did after the battle was over? We are about to uncover the most insane and shocking sexual practices the Vikings used to completely dominate their enemies. This is going to expose social norms that would leave you absolutely stunned. This isn't just about sex, it's about power, shame, and a worldview so extreme, it will change how you see Vikings forever. The Viking you see in movies, the one with the horned helmet which they never actually wore, is a total fake. He's a simple guy who loves violence. He raids, he pillages, he burns, and that's it. But the real Viking was 1,000 times more complex. Their entire society was built on a hardcore code of honor, status, and masculinity. And the key to this entire code was sex. For the Vikings, sex wasn't always for fun or for making babies. It was a tool. It was a language. And in war, some experts believe it was a weapon they used to destroy not just armies, but the souls of their enemies. To get this, you have to throw away everything you know about love and sexuality. You have to enter a world where sexual power was the same as military power, and where being shamed sexually was 1,000,000 times worse than death. The Viking sagas are filled with crazy battles, but they also reveal a culture obsessed with one single word, Ergi. This one word is the key to everything. Ergi was the most vile insult you could throw at a man. It was so bad that if you accused a Viking of it, he could legally kill you on the spot. It meant you were unmanly, weak, and, specifically, that you were the passive partner in a gay sexual act. In the Viking world, the act itself didn't matter. The role you played was everything. The guy who was the active, penetrating partner, whether it was with a man or a woman, lost zero honor. In fact, he was seen as more powerful. But the man who was penetrated, the man forced to take the woman's role, was completely stripped of his manhood. He became an Ergi man, a total outcast who lost all his rights. His identity was destroyed. And this deep-seated terror of being unmanned is the very thing the Vikings may have turned into a weapon of mass destruction. When a Viking army showed up at your village, they weren't just there for your gold. They were there to break your spirit so completely that you would never even think about fighting back again. And this is where their obsession with Ergi became a strategy of pure terror. For Vikings, the battle didn't stop when the fighting did. The real conquest could get way more personal. While there isn't a ton of direct proof that Vikings systematically raped defeated male leaders, their entire culture suggests it was a calculated move of psychological warfare. Captured women were always tragically vulnerable, just like in any war. But the Vikings might have targeted men for a truly chilling and strategic reason. By sexually humiliating a defeated king or chieftain, the Vikings sent a message that was brutal and crystal clear. They didn't just beat the man, they showed everyone that he couldn't even protect his own body, the very source of his honor and masculinity. The psychological damage was permanent, designed to shatter the morale of an entire people by defiling their leader. Forcing a man into that passive sexual role was the ultimate power move. It was making the Ergi insult real. It was a symbolic castration, way worse than any sword wound. A man could survive a fight and still be a warrior. But a man who was made Ergi was shamed for life. The shame wasn't just on him, it stained his entire family and community. The Vikings even had a specific term, klamhog, or shame stroke. This was a symbolic attack where you'd hit a man on the buttocks during a fight. This move was considered just as serious as stabbing him because it implied the same thing: forced submission and feminization. It shows how deeply this fear was baked into their warrior culture. Enemies weren't just beaten, they were ritually humiliated in a way that meant total social death. This weapon didn't just kill you, it erased you. This brutal mindset wasn't just for war, it was for business. The Viking slave trade was a massive part of their economy, a huge network shipping people from Britain and Europe all the way to the Middle East. And in this business, the male body was just another product to be modified for a bigger profit. Literate men like monks, who weren't good for manual labor, sometimes faced a horrifying fate: castration. This wasn't just for cruelty, it was for cold, hard cash. Eunuchs were worth a fortune in the Byzantine and Arab empires, where they served as guards and administrators. The Vikings, being the ultimate entrepreneurs, saw a market and supplied it. A 10th century writer even mentioned merchants who specialized in castration for these exact markets. It shows a world where your body, your identity, and your manhood could be literally carved up and sold off. Slavery, or thraldom, was a fundamental, non-negotiable part of Viking society. Slaves did the hardest jobs, got the worst food, and could be killed at any moment by their masters. And for female slaves, this meant they had zero control over their own bodies. While the law actually protected free Viking women from creeps, those rules completely disappeared for slaves. A female slave was property, and her body belonged to her master. He could use her sexually whenever he wanted, with absolutely no consequences. The law codes themselves tell a terrifying story. In Viking Iceland, raping a free woman was a massive crime, but raping a slave woman was treated as a property crime. The rapist just had to pay a fine to her owner, like he'd broken a chair. This created a world with two sets of rules, where a free woman's honor was protected, but an enslaved woman was completely vulnerable. Maybe the most insane story that mixes sex, slavery, and death comes from an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan. He witnessed the ship burial of a Viking chieftain, and what he wrote down is one of the most disturbing historical documents ever. When the chief died, his family asked for a volunteer from his slave girls to die with him. One girl actually volunteered. From that second, her fate was sealed, and she was put through a 10-day ritual of pure horror. At first, they treated her like a queen, dressing her in fancy clothes and giving her tons of alcohol. But then, the ritual got dark. Ibn Fadlan says the slave girl was taken to the tents of the chief's most loyal warriors. Every single one of them had sex with her. And after each time, the man would say, "Tell your master I did this only for love of him." This was a twisted ritual to transfer their loyalty to their dead chief through this poor woman's body. On the final day, they took her to the funeral ship. There, an old woman they called the Angel of Death strangled her with a rope and stabbed her with a dagger at the same time. Her body was then put next to her master, and the entire ship was set on fire. This is a real historical account. For that slave girl, there was no choice. Her body was just an object used sexually by dozens of men before being brutally sacrificed. But here is the ultimate plot twist. While the Vikings were unbelievably brutal to enemies and slaves, the rules for their own free people were, in some ways, shockingly liberal and modern, especially compared to the rest of Europe. It's a massive paradox that shows a society with rules based on power and practicality, not just one moral code. In most of the world back then, marriage was forever and controlled by men. For a free Viking woman, it was a contract, and she had the power to break it. A woman could legally divorce her husband for a reason that was unthinkable anywhere else. She wasn't sexually satisfied. If her husband couldn't perform in bed, she could literally just declare herself divorced. Boom. Done. This gave women insane leverage. Also, if a husband hit his wife, she could divorce him for that too. The Vikings were also pretty flexible with monogamy. A wife had a powerful position, but it was common for rich men to have multiple wives and concubines. A concubine was usually a lower-class woman, often a slave who was basically in an open, long-term relationship. Her kids didn't have the same rights as the wife's kids, but nobody hid the relationship. Affairs were also common, and people cared less about the morality and more about the practical stuff, like not having accidental kids or messing up family alliances. This created a wild society with official marriages, side girlfriends, and casual flings all happening at the same time. For even more proof of their practical approach, they had trial marriages. A couple could live together for a year to test things out, both socially and sexually. If either one wasn't happy at the end of the year, they could just split up with zero social stigma. It was basically a free one-year trial for marriage, a system that was 1,000 years ahead of its time. The Viking view on sex wasn't just for the bedroom or battlefield, it was part of their actual religion. In their world, the body wasn't shameful, and sexual stuff could be part of a holy ceremony. One of the most mind-blowing examples comes from a text called the Volsa Thatar. I am not making this up. The story is about a pagan family that preserved the penis of a dead horse, which they called the Volsi. They treated this thing like a holy relic, wrapping it in linen and herbs. Every single night, the family performed a ritual where they passed the Volsi around. As each person held the phallus, they would say a prayer to it, asking for good luck and fertility. The fact that they openly worshipped a horse penis shows a culture that had a completely different view of sex than the Christian world that came after them. Just because the sagas can be shy about details doesn't mean the Vikings were prudes. They had their own R-rated art form, a type of poetry called mansonger, which were basically sexually explicit love songs. These songs were considered so powerful and so good at stirring up passion that they were eventually made illegal in Iceland. The fear was that these poems were a form of black magic that could force someone to fall in love with the singer against their will. Think about that. Sex was totally fine, but a really good poem about sex was considered dangerous magic. It's a super weird cultural quirk that shows how much power they believed erotic words could have. So this brings us back to the big question. What about gay relationships in the Viking Age? As we've seen, everything was dominated by the idea of Ergi and the power dynamic of who was penetrating who. Being the passive partner was the ultimate shame. But does that mean consensual same-sex relationships didn't happen? The real answer is, we don't really know. The sagas were written down hundreds of years later by Christians, so they're silent on it. There are no stories of same-sex couples like we think of them today. But the fact that they only cared about the passive role suggests that as long as a man did his duty, got married and had kids, nobody might have cared what else he did, as long as he was always the dominant one. What is absolutely clear is that Viking sexuality wasn't about orientation, it was about a strict food chain of dominance and submission. A man's entire worth was tied to his manliness, and manliness meant being the powerful, active one in everything he did, including sex. It was an insane system that created both shocking brutality and surprising freedoms, a world of contradictions that is still fascinating and horrifying. The world of the Vikings was not black and white. It was a brutal, insane, and deeply contradictory place. They were ruthless conquerors who built an entire culture on dominance, and at the same time, they were a practical people who gave their free women rights that were unheard of anywhere else. They were slavers who built an economy on selling human beings, and they were romantics who believed a love poem could literally be dangerous magic. Their sexual practices show a culture that was obsessed with power and honor. The terror they created came not just from their axes, but from a deep psychological playbook on how to destroy an enemy from the inside out. But inside their own homes, with their own people, they played by a different set of rules, ones that valued pleasure, compatibility, and a woman's right to choose. History is never simple. It's a messy and often disturbing story. The Vikings weren't simple heroes or villains. They were from a world where power and survival were everything, and where the most intimate acts could be the ultimate expression of freedom or total domination. The next time you see a Viking raider, look past the acts and remember the far more complex and shocking world they actually lived in. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden corners of the past, be sure to smash that subscribe button for more explorations into history's most shocking stories. And let us know in the comments, what part of the Viking worldview surprised you the most?